Twinwood Farm, near Bedford in England. A wartime fighter base at the heart of one of the most mysterious episodes in the Second World War. Just after 7 in the evening on the 24th of December 1944, the BBC announced Major Alton Glenn Miller, director of the famous United States Army Air Force Band, is reported missing while on a flight from England to Paris. The plane in which he was a passenger left England on December the 15th, and no trace of it has been found since takeoff. Glenn Miller, the most popular band leader of the era, had vanished into thin air. The official version of the events which led to his disappearance has become one of the great myths of the war. How did Glenn Miller meet his end? Glenn Miller had shot to fame in the late 1930s. The smooth saxophone sound of his orchestra was instantly recognizable the world over. After years of struggle, Miller was a celebrity, and his orchestra the most sought after in America. Success took Miller to Hollywood. Half of Europe had been occupied by Adolf Hitler, but the citizens of Beverly Hills were more occupied with the good life in California. The war seemed a long way off. Hollywood was in the business of dreams, not bombs. The Glenn Miller Orchestra topped the bill in the most exclusive clubs in town. In a short time, Glenn Miller had become a very rich man. He was also becoming a fixture in the movie musicals, which were one of the screen staples of the day. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941 put a stop to all that. America was now at war, and within 3 months the first GIs were strolling the streets of London, examining historical landmarks. And some of London's cultural attractions. The Windmill Review, with its mixture of low comics and nude tableau, boasted "We never close." It had stayed open throughout the Blitz and was one of London's great show business institutions, a magnet for master sergeants. A number of Hollywood institutions were joining up. Film stars Tyrone Power and Clark Gable. Dance bands like Gene Krupa's were pitching into the war effort, giving concerts at training camps. In November 1942, Glenn Miller volunteered and was inducted into the army with the rank of captain. His orchestra was broken up, and for a while their leader found himself exiled to the musical Siberia of military band music. Eventually, he was asked to form the American Air Force Band, which contained many of his musicians. The band's manager, with the rank of lieutenant, was a booking agent named Don Haynes. Miller was desperate to entertain troops overseas. and after some string pulling in Washington, he and the band arrived in England in the summer of 1944. It was a long way from California, or Miller's comfortable family home in Tenafly, New Jersey. The band, exuding brash American confidence, had arrived in a welcoming but pinched and war-weary Britain. In Trafalgar Square, the base of Nelson's column was plastered with propaganda posters. After D-Day, the end of the war was in sight, but the rigours and restrictions of rationing seemed to stretch into the future. Overhead droned Hitler's V-1 flying bombs, fraying the nerves of civilians on their flight path. On the other side of the Channel, Allied troops had finally broken out of the Normandy bridgehead and were racing across northern France. Their route was lined with cheering French villagers. The way to Paris lay open. But each and every soldier knew that much hard fighting lay ahead before the defeat of Nazi Germany. Miller, now a major, was kept busy in England. A few feathers were ruffled by the fact that most of his audiences were American. Miller's British fans felt left out. The stuffy BBC seemed reluctant to give Miller's swing music much of an airing. And Miller himself complained of exhaustion and alarming weight loss. Was he just tired or seriously ill? Nevertheless, he continued to keep up a punishing schedule. In England, Miller's boss was the movie star David Niven. Before he launched his career in Hollywood, Niven had been a regular army officer. After a lively war, later recounted in his autobiography The Moon's a Balloon, Niven was now a lieutenant colonel and the associate director of troop broadcasting in special services. One of Niven's responsibilities was to organize a series of concerts which the Air Force Band was to play in Paris at the end of December 1944. Glenn Miller had a suite in the Mount Royal Hotel in London, but Niven had also found him a base 50 miles north of the capital, in Bedford, where most of the BBC had been evacuated in 1939. The pleasant, rolling countryside around Bedford was a welcome relief from the dangers of London's V1 bomb alley. Nearby was the picturesque village of Milton Ernest, whose hall housed the headquarters of the US 8th Air Force's Service Command. Here, Miller and Don Haynes got to know a staff officer, Lieutenant Colonel Norman F. Basel, who was responsible for the supply and servicing of 8th Air Force airfields in liberated Europe. This part of England was crammed with 8th Air Force and RAF bases. From here, B-17 bombers took off to pound the heart of the Reich. A stone's throw from Milton Ernest was the airfield at Twinwood Farm, a sprawling night fighter training station where Beaufighter and Mosquito aircrew learned the deadly secrets of their trade. Wartime ghosts still haunt Twinwood Farm, but the runway down which the night fighters once thundered has been replaced by a beet field. On the edge of the woods which fringed the station, mouldering huts and rusty hangars recall the past. According to the manager of Miller's band, Don Haynes, it was to Twinwood that he drove with his boss and Colonel Basel on the morning of the 15th of December 1944. Basel had offered Miller a lift to Paris when all other flights in the UK had been grounded. In bad weather conditions, a 200-foot cloud base and heavy rain, The three men waited outside the control tower for the arrival of Basel's aircraft from nearby Abbots Ripton. An American ferry pilot, John Morgan, who regularly took Basel to Europe, would be flying it. The plane appeared through the cloud. Miller and Basel clambered aboard the single-engined Norseman, and Morgan took off at approximately 1:45 p.m. Neither he nor his passengers, Miller and Basel, were ever seen again. Or so Don Haynes' story goes. The small, dapper Morgan was competent enough in clear conditions, but was a poor instrument pilot. However, Twinwood's daily wartime history, officially known as Form 540, records that on Friday, the 15th of December, the airfield was closed. It states, "No flying today." Was Glenn Miller aboard a plane which never took off from Twinwood, or did he disappear after an accident or incident so embarrassing that a cover story for his last flight was cooked up to hide the truth? Morgan never filed a flight plan, but in the official version of subsequent events, the Norseman flew from either Abbots Ripton or Twinwood and then over Bovingdon Airfield to cross the channel at Beachy Head, skirting a bomb jettison area. It then headed towards the coast of France and Morgan's planned destination. This route has prompted the theory that the Norseman, flying low and slow over the channel, was caught in a rain of bombs jettisoned by a returning Allied bomber formation. Aircrew have stepped forward to claim this dubious honor, but careful research indicates that Morgan took an entirely different course to France. During this period, a Norseman was lost over the channel to jettisoned bombs, but this was on the 16th of December, and the records confirm that it was an entirely different plane, on its way to delivery in Chartres. A clue to the Glenn Miller mystery may lie in the slightly sinister figure of Norman Basel. The 44-year-old colonel was a brash and brutal man. One of his ferry pilots observed that he was about as subtle as a loaded .45 revolver. Basel's job took him all over Europe, opening up and supplying airfields and enabling him to cut through much of the red tape which surrounded flying to the continent. He was a notably reckless operator, frequently ordering Morgan and other pilots to fly in hazardous conditions for which the Norseman's primitive instruments were not equipped. On the 17th of September 1944, Basel and his pilot had run into the Air Armada bound for the drop at Arnhem. He ordered his pilot to follow the stream into the battle zone and only escaped being shot down by a whisker. Basel's favorite expression was, "Do you want to live forever?" It seemed as if the blustering colonel did not. Paris was a frequent port of call for Colonel Basel. The French capital had been liberated in August 1944, amid scenes of wild rejoicing and the summary dispatch of those suspected of collaborating with the Germans. Within days of the Americans' arrival, Paris's famous nightlife was back in full swing. Basel always had lots of money to spend in Paris, and plenty of financial interests in nightclubs, restaurants, and shops selling luxury items. Paris, with its wealthy population, who had sat out the war, was the perfect arena for black marketeering on a large scale. It has been suggested that Basel was up to his neck in the black market and was also playing a shadowy role in illegal currency dealing. There would be no shortage of takers. When Basel went to France, he invariably took several large crates with him, ostensibly containing cigarettes. But France was awash with camels and lucky strikes. No amount of them could finance the activities that Basel was rumored to be masterminding. One of the 8th Air Force Special Command's storage depots was near Bedford, at the airfield at Honington. It held huge quantities of aircraft first aid kits. 4-engine bombers like the B-17 carried 8, each of which contained 10 ampoules of morphine. Although there is no evidence to prove it, morphine, a more potent and lucrative drug than nicotine, might have been Basell's business. In moving it, he had the singular advantage of being able to organize direct clearance from Honington to Europe without having to undergo an automatic customs check at RAF Bovingdon. It has been suggested that Glenn Miller may have been mixed up in some way with Basell's black market activities. One thing is now almost certain. Miller did not fly with Basell and Morgan on the 15th of December. Don Haynes had booked Miller on a Dakota shuttle flight from Bovingdon to Paris on or about the 15th of December. On the 15th, flights from Bovingdon continued until 3 p.m., when bad weather closed them down. Could Glenn Miller have been arrested at Bovingdon when a routine search revealed that, in all innocence, he was carrying some of Basell's contraband? Or did he catch a flight to Paris on the 14th? After the war, the BBC sound engineer attached to Miller's band, TIGHAR, claimed to have travelled to Paris in the seat behind him on that day. Strong evidence that Miller did reach France is provided by Joan Heath, who was the personal driver of Air Marshal Tedder, the British deputy to the Supreme Allied Commander, General Eisenhower, and based at Ike's headquarters at Versailles. On the 16th of December, Eisenhower threw a big party to celebrate his promotion to the rank of General of the Army. According to Joan Heath, Glenn Miller was at the party. At about 2 a.m., Eisenhower instructed her to drive Miller to a nearby airfield. Here, Miller boarded a Bobcat aircraft clutching several parcels which he told her were Christmas presents for his family stateside. The Bobcat lacked the range to fly the Atlantic. If Joan Miller's story is true, he must have been going to another base to board a bigger plane. Don Haynes arrived in Paris on the 18th of December to find Miller missing. No official search was made for the aircraft. Given Miller's celebrity, this seems unusual, but it is explicable if those in Supreme Allied Command, including General Eisenhower, knew that Miller had not gone down in John Morgan's Norseman on the 15th of December. Intriguingly, several days after the party on the 16th, Joan Heath asked Eisenhower if he had heard from Glenn Miller, to which Ike replied, "Maybe I'll never hear." 10 days elapsed between Miller's probable flight from Bovingdon and the announcement of his disappearance. Time enough, if the Allied top brass knew what had really happened, to concoct a story of Miller's flight on the Norseman. This goes some way to explaining Eisenhower's wistful remark to Joan Heath about never seeing Glenn Miller again. The details of the Norseman flight, as retailed by the faithful Don Haynes and later enshrined in his so-called diaries, were in all probability derived from a flight to Paris which Haynes had made with Basell on the 8th of November. This is Morgan's Norseman, photographed on that day with an RAF fitter, Alex Sleep. The weather details in Haynes' account fit those for the 8th of November, but do not match the Met reports for the 15th of December. It seems likely that on the 15th of December, Morgan flew alone, taking a more easterly route than that officially suggested. He probably flew over London and crossed the Channel coast at Dymchurch, where the Royal Observer Corps spotted a Norseman at about 2:25 p.m. Nevertheless, an official missing aircrew report, which was released in 1948, names Miller and Basell as Morgan's passengers. Careful examination suggests that this document is a forgery, typed on 2 different typewriters on 2 separate occasions. But was Basell aboard the Norseman? Research by Wilbur and David Wright has revealed that the US Army was paying Basell's pension well into the 1950s. Which leaves John Morgan feeding the fishes somewhere in the Channel. His Norseman, with its identifying engine number, has never been found. A further twist to the tale is given by the curious silence of David Niven. Niven was both Miller's boss and a friend. According to some reports, he was seen with Miller drinking in a Paris bar on the afternoon of the 14th of December. In his best-selling autobiography, The Moon's a Balloon, Niven devoted much space to his wartime career, but he makes no mention of his association with Glenn Miller or his legendary disappearance. To the end of his days, Niven declined to be drawn on the affair. In The Moon's a Balloon, Niven recounts that on the 16th of December 1944, the Germans launched a massive offensive in the Ardennes. Niven hurried up to the front line to rescue his friend Marlene Dietrich, who was entertaining the American troops there. One of Niven's former colleagues remembered receiving a telephone call from the British Star, who told him, "We're going to get Marlene." Was Niven accompanied by Glenn Miller? In her own autobiography, Dietrich tells of seeing an overturned jeep as she was driven to safety. Someone in it had been badly injured. Was this a disguised reference to an accident which befell Glenn Miller? Was this the secret which David Niven carried to his grave? Significantly, perhaps, a skin condition prevented Miller from wearing a dog tag, and in the confusion, he may not have been recognized. After the war, stories circulated that Miller had been seen in an army hospital in Columbus, Ohio, suffering from severe head injuries. In April 1987, an inquiry by Wilbur Wright received this reply from the state of New Jersey. The letter was later dismissed as a typing error. But David Niven did not attend Eisenhower's party on the 16th, and Miller could not have been in two places at once. The last known sighting of Glenn Miller was not made by Don Haynes in England, but probably by Joan Heath in France, after the party thrown by General Eisenhower. Was Miller being flown back to the United States to face a court-martial connected with Basel's activities? If so, why was he apparently hobnobbing with Ike only a few hours before his departure? No record of any court-martial has been uncovered in the United States, although there would have been no need for one if Miller had had a nervous breakdown and was judged unfit to plead. Or did an ailing Miller die of cancer shortly after his return? Miller's brother Herb believed that Glenn died in England in November 1944, and in the weeks before his disappearance was impersonated by a look-alike. When the time came to celebrate VE Day in May 1945, Glenn Miller was already becoming a footnote to the history of the Second World War. The control tower at Bovingdon is now no more, but the Glenn Miller mystery persists. Also gone is one of 8 documents in a missing personnel file on Glenn Miller sent to Washington on the 28th of December 1944. This is not a missing aircrew report, but a report reserved for those not involved in the disappearance of an aircraft. One document should contain the details of Miller's last days, but like Major Alton Glenn Miller, this too has vanished without trace. In the Glenn Miller myth, the band leader took off from Twinwood with Basel and Morgan on the 15th of December 1944 and went down in the Channel. But a growing pile of evidence, particularly that collected by Wilbur and David Wright for their book Millergate, has cast doubt on the official version. Crucially, there was no flying at Twinwood on the 15th of December. Miller was seen by Teddy Gower on a Dakota on the 14th and later in Paris by Joan Heath. Thereafter, he disappears from view. No search was ever made for the Norseman. It would have been unnecessary if the top brass, including the Supreme Allied Commander, already knew what had happened to Glenn Miller. Did Glenn Miller suffer a near-fatal accident after saying goodbye to Joan Heath? Was he then flown back to America to die in a hospital in Ohio? The letter to Wilbur Wright from the state of New Jersey suggests that this is a distinct possibility. Attempts to uncover the truth about Glenn Miller are still being blocked by the US government, and the US authorities have been equally uncooperative about revealing the secrets of Colonel Basel's posthumous pension payments. Some researchers believe that Basel was paid off, and after the war turned up in Rhodesia, now the independent state of Zimbabwe. Was Glenn Miller's disappearance the result of a tragic accident, or was he engaged on work for the US government which went wrong, and whose failure was too embarrassing to reveal even today? The hunt for the truth continues.